Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Welcome. I appreciate you joining me. I am Kevin Iole. I am joined right now by my friend. You know him undoubtedly if you have followed MMA for any length of time, because he has been around. I can't even think about it, Damon. How long have we known each other? It's been a while.
It's funny. I always tell people I've been covering combat sports for like over 20 years now. And like there's very few people who can say they've done it longer than me. You are one of those people. And I think we first met. God, it's got to be 2003, 2004. It's been years. It's been a lot of years.
Yeah, we have a history together. Damon Martin is joining me. He is the writer right now for MMA Fighting. Has done such a great job over the years. And I just thought I would have Damon come on. So there's a lot going on in MMA, as there always is. And I thought, it would be a good time for Damon and I to kind of go over some of the top stories in MMA and, kind of answer your questions if you guys have anything. So I just want to set the ground rules. If we can, let's try to make it strictly about MMA. Boxing, we're going to put to some other time. I'll do a live for some boxing talk. And so with that, Damon, I want to start by asking you this question. I think it's one of the biggest stories in MMA. What is going to happen? Who is Ilia Topuria going to fight? Is it going to be Islam Makhachev? I've said I thought it might be Arman Tsarukyan. I don't know if you caught this, but my prediction in one of my columns, I said I think UFC 317 International Fight Week will be Jones versus Aspinall, Ilia versus Charles Oliveira. Islam versus Charles Oliveira, and then Ilia versus Arman Tsarukyan. I hear things all over the place. What do you think?
So it's funny you say that. Right after Ilia gave up his title and said he's going to 155, I said him and Arman was the fight to make, because Arman, of course, had the disaster back in January. The back injury knocked him out of the title fight with Islam. And I understood when Dana said, hey, you got to go get another fight in. Like it or not, I'm not saying you should sit there and blame the guy, but he did kind of mess it up. So you have to kind of, get him back in there. And I said, well, what better way to do it than do Ilia versus Arman? That's an incredible fight. And no one could deny if Ilia wins that one, he definitely deserves a title shot. So I do like that idea. But I do understand the argument of people saying just put Ilia in there right away, because, listen, Ilia has star power, and if he could somehow pull off the upset, and it would be an upset to beat Islam Makhachev, he would be a megastar. I mean, he would be on another stratosphere that we haven't seen probably since Conor, in terms of popularity. But I like your idea. I think Arman Ilia, if you're going to make Arman fight somebody, that's something new. We haven't seen it. And then, like you said, Charles and Islam, or, maybe Islam just waits till October, November when it's, around, Abu Dhabi. That's a huge area of the world for him. Maybe they just wait and have him fight then. So I do like the Arman Ilia idea. I think that's an incredible fight.
Yeah, I think that, to me, it makes a lot of sense. And, I know that they're not really high on Arman, especially after they talked to him about fighting Gaethje. And he said, well, I got to do it at 160. And he lost that fight. So, Arman is going to have to do something to kind of get back in their good graces. And to me, that is the fight that I think, wow, if you put Ilia in that fight, you're welcoming him to 155 with as tough a fight as you could ask him to take. Like, I look at it and I say, what outside of Islam, what would be the toughest fight for Ilia at 155? Would it be Charles? Would it be Gaethje? I think he would handle Gaethje fairly easily myself. I just think the styles and the way they go, I think Ilia would handle Gaethje without too much trouble. And I look at it and I think Arman has that style where he's defensive enough that he can, maybe grapple with him a little bit. He's strong. I'm not sure that Arman can beat Ilia, but I think, that he might give him the best run for the money and show us really what he might have going into the division.
And I mean, the reality is, listen, I love Justin Gaethje. We all love Justin Gaethje, but the reality is he did lose, pretty dramatically to Max Holloway. Great win over Rafael Fiziev, and I do understand the timing and opportunity thing. That's how Dustin Poirier had his title shot last year. I'm okay with all that, but the reality is, and we've seen Charles, we've seen Charles and Islam, we've seen Charles and Arman. That would be something. Now, again, in a perfect world, would I like to just see Arman get the title shot? Sure, I understand that logic, and I don't have a problem with that, but we just know it's not going to happen. The UFC is just not going to change their stance all of a sudden and say, oh, well, forget about January. We'll just slot you right back into a title shot. Like I said, like it or not, he had his opportunity. I know you can't help getting injured, but that's the reality. You kind of messed up the UFC's plans. And listen, Ilia, I think Ilia is incredible, but I do understand Islam's argument of saying, I'm not going to get as much credit beating a featherweight. But if he can go out and beat Arman, or even Charles for that matter, no one can deny that Ilia Topuria deserves a title shot.
Of
But
course.
I do understand Islam's argument. Like, he already beat Volkanovski twice. He just got a late replacement on Moicano. Like, what if he goes out there and mauls Ilia Topuria? The narrative is going to be, well, you just beat up another featherweight.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, when I first thought of it, I said, yeah, he has to go straight into a title shot. But then I thought about it and I said, yeah, Islam is not going to get the credit. And Islam is such a great fighter. He deserves the credit for what he's done. I mean, look at his reign as champion, his title fight beating Charles, and what he has done since. It's been phenomenal. And I think if you sit there and you say, hey, we're going to put him in against Ilia, a guy moving up with no fights at 155, even though I don't know if you saw that, Ilia said he weighed 190 he was online talking, and that particular day he weighed 190. I would say that's not really a guy making featherweight too easily, right? But I think that you're right in that saying that, hey, Islam deserves to fight a full-fledged lightweight, a guy that has proven himself, that has a win in the division. And the only concern that I have about that, and I want There we are. Okay. I don't know what happened there, Damon. That was strange. So
Yeah,
sorry.
that's all right. You froze on me. I was like, did I do something? Did I hit something? Did I touch something?
But anyways, the only question I was going to ask you was this, is if, let's say Islam fights Charles, beats Charles, then he goes up, we're never going to get the fight with Ilia. And that's like what I think could be the super fight, because Islam, as much trouble as Ilia had making 145, Islam is having that same kind of trouble making 155. And a move for him to 170 is not far away.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think if you do, listen, as much as I think Islam fighting in July or June would make sense, again, I think there's a world where you just go ahead and do Ilia and Arman in June, International Fight Week, and then you just have Islam wait till October again, because Islam already fought this year. He fought in January, again, not the fight he was supposed to have, but he went through a full training camp. Obviously, the month of March is Ramadan. He's not going to fight right away. June would probably be the earliest. Just hold him till October. Abu Dhabi is going to be a massive market. He's got a huge fan base over there. Or even November, MSG, Madison Square Garden. That would be a massive card as well. I don't think you need to rush him back in there, especially if you can do Jones Aspinall in June. Do Islam and do Arman and Ilia in June, and then the winner gets Islam either October, November. I don't think there's anything wrong with him waiting, because again, he's still getting 2 fights in. He just luckily already fought in January.
Right. So let's mention Aspinall versus Jones, and I want to get your take on it, and then we'll go into some of the questions that we have on there. My take has been all along that Jones is not ducking, but that Jones has kind of got this weird thing about you got to beat certain guys, and you have to do that, and it's just sort of the way John has always been, right? And so I think that he'll take the fight if they pay right. I think this whole $50 million thing is kind of BS, and I don't actually think that there was. Well, first of all, the PFL is not in the position to offer $50 million for anybody to fight. They're paying Francis, what is it, $12 million. So they're going to pay $62 million to make a fight. I do not think so, right? I don't think that is going to happen. So what is your take on where they go with that fight?
I think it happens. It's just a matter of timing. And here's a comparison I'll make, Kevin. I think you'll understand this. You're a Steelers guy. I'm a Bengals guy. So me taking a shot to Cleveland Browns probably makes sense.
Yes, go.
Call John Jones Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett just wants to win. That's all he cares about. He wants a Super Bowl. No. I mean, I'm not saying he doesn't, but, when they came with a giant bag of money and said, hey, Myles, you sure you don't want to play in Cleveland? He's like, okay. They're no closer to winning a Super Bowl today than they were 6 months ago. But if John Jones could say Aspinall isn't as accomplished, he doesn't have the name. This is John Jones playing the game of saying, add that extra zero, add that extra whatever. And I don't think he's asking for $50 million. I really don't buy that. Should the UFC offer him a big, big bag? Absolutely. It's the biggest fight you could book in the sport right now. That's all it is. So it's just a matter of them coming to an agreement and saying, hey, John, we're willing to give you $20 million up front or whatever. And with the TV deal going on right now, there's some leverage there as far as like, hey, we're going to be able to promote this in November going into our new TV deal. I think it's going to happen. I think it's just a matter of timing when it happens. And I agree with you. John Jones isn't ducking anybody. He's the greatest fighter of all time. He's not ducking anybody. He's playing the Myles Garrett game. He's like, I want an accomplished guy. I want the biggest name. What he wants is a big paycheck, and rightfully so.
Yeah, no, he deserves it. I mean, somebody has mentioned this, and I think this is true, that Jones isn't the pay-per-view draw that, a Conor McGregor was, that, Khabib turned out to be a big pay-per-view draw, right? Because as the B-side against Conor, he did, $2.5 million. So, Khabib is a big draw. GSP was a big draw. Drawn, I think, is one level down from those guys, right? Now, not as a fighter, but as a, as an attraction. So I think, the fact that there's rumors out there that he asked for $50 million, I think that was just the fact that Don Davis said, hey, I know where you can make $50 million. I was hoping the PFL would turn into a viable option, but I just think the guys that are running it have run it into the ground, right? I mean, they don't promote. I don't know what the hell they're doing, right? And I'm not crazy about. I saw. I think it was Ian Parker was on Sirius XM the other day, and he was kind of, defending what they have done, saying, "Oh, look what happened to UFC when they had Strikeforce." When UFC bought Strikeforce, when UFC bought the WEC, when they bought all these different organizations, what did they immediately do? All the big names were immediately fought, and they ran a lot of shows, and that's not what the PFL does. And if the PFL sitting there thinking, well, we're going to hold out Francis, and then we're going to get John Jones, and we're going to make bag, and then say goodbye, I just don't. That's never going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, the problem that PFL has is like, if you could not have botched the Bellator thing worse than they did. I mean, it was a big deal, and we were all I think we were all genuinely excited. Like, wow, you're actually going out and making this investment. And again, to a certain extent, maybe they didn't pay a whole lot for what was basically getting it off Paramount's bottom line.
Nothing, yeah, basically, yeah.
But there was a genuine excitement. We're like, ooh, we're actually going to get to see some cool fights, some cool matchups, and then it just got bungled beyond belief with. The first, like the novel card of doing PFL versus Bellator, that was a cool card, but then a bunch of fights fell apart, and then it didn't pay off the way it did. And then you have Patricio Pitbull saying, hey, where am I fighting? Patchy Mix, where am I fighting? Aaron Pico saying, I'll sit out a year rather than fight for PFL. You could not have imagined it going worse. And as much as I love Francis, I will always be a Francis Ngannou guy. I love Francis, one of the nicest, sweetest guys in the sport, and a monster in a cage. He was never a massive draw in the UFC. So you're investing in a guy that was just never a huge pay-per-view draw. And the problem is heavyweight has always been kind of paper thin. Him fighting Renan Ferreira, sure, okay, but how many people were willing to plunk down $50? And if the pay-per-view
that was less than 10,000. That was the problem.
Yeah. And you're paying the guy $12 million. Like that's an issue.
And you paid Renan $2 million.
Yeah, so it's just an illogical business. It's an illogical business model, and like it or not, we can absolutely have that conversation about UFC and fighter pay, and although there's a real conversation we absolutely should have, but you just can't put that kind of money on the line without getting something back, and I don't know where they're getting any of this back from.
Right. So, and the only reason I brought that up was that's not really a viable option. That's what I was trying to say. And as you saw, it popped up when you were talking there, the GOAT and someone named Kevin. So we got some wise guys in the house here, right?
I appreciate the GOAT. I love it. I love it.
All my fans, Damon, you're going to see all my fans pop up here. So let's try to get to some of these questions. And Diz asked, is there any truth to Colby saying Jones is asking for 40 to 50? And I, as I said, I think that was a Don Davis thing, and I think he was saying theoretically, hey, look, if it takes 40 or 50, we can make that fight. The thing is, Jones did sign for the fight, right? And he signed to fight Francis, and then Francis made the decision because of the boxing matches to go to the PFL. And so as a result, that the fight did not happen in the UFC. Now, when you look at it from the UFC standpoint, they're saying, if we offered Francis, and I think their deal was $10 million to fight Jones, maybe I'm not remembering correctly, but I think I'm accurate on that. So if they were saying $10 million to fight Jones, why would they turn around? They're the ones that built Francis. They're the ones that made him into whatever level of star that he is. Why would they turn around and let PFL, which his last two pay-per-views did less than 1,000 and then 10,000? Why would they say, okay, we're going to let you share on this big bag, and we're going to take, hey, you have Francis, you're stuck paying him $12 million for the next fight. Go for it. I think that's what they say. And to me, that's business. That's not favoring one organization over another. I was hoping that the PFL would turn into something more than what it has become, a legitimate option for fighters, a legitimate promoter, where we knew they were never going to take over the UFC, but they would be a legitimate option. And I don't even think they're really that, given, what happens now.
Yeah, and I think I'd heard 8 to 10 million, I think was the offer I heard for the Francis. So I think you're right on the track there. I think it was right around that what I heard. And the reality is, listen, I want to be clear about this. I love Francis. Francis is an incredible fighter.
Right.
But again, this sport is all about, what have you done for me lately? And right now, the only fight people are talking about is Tom Aspinall, John Jones. No one is even, right. Francis is an afterthought at this point. And I'm not knocking Francis. I'm just saying that's the reality. Out of sight, out of mind. You fight in the PFL, you're fighting Renan Ferreira. Tom Aspinall's wrecking Curtis Blades and guys guys you've seen. Now there's a legitimate threat to John Jones, the greatest fighter of all time. That's the fight we want. And I'm not saying Francis is forgotten, but he's kind of out of the picture, and he's kind of in no man's land. He's basically you're going to fight Vadim Nemkov in PFL? Like, that's literally like their only real option. Like,
and Damon, when Francis got mad at me because I wrote a column at the time, and I said, well, you're going to choose either to go and fight 3 fights, 1 fight in MMA against Ferreira and 2 boxing matches. And I really thought it was 1 boxing match, but say 2 boxing matches, and then that's it. There's nothing else for you out there, right? I didn't think he was going to give Tyson Fury much of a fight. And honestly, I'm not sure he gave Tyson Fury much of a fight, but Tyson Fury didn't show up, and that's neither here nor there. So he got that second, boxing match out of it. And it worked for him, right? He's richer than he ever thought he was going to be. He did not lose. He won. He made a ton of money. But now as an MMA fighter, if Francis wants to, say, hey, I'll fight Jones. Well, you had the chance to fight Jones, and you made the decision not to do it because you wanted to pursue boxing. And I understand why you did. And I, in a lot of ways, agree with it. He's an older guy toward the end of his career, right? Take the money when you have a chance for it. And that was life-altering money for him. I get it. But now you can't come back and say, oh, Jones won't fight me. I just think that's the wrong way to go there.
And going back, I'm not digging, I'm just bringing up the Myles Garrett thing. Like, I don't fault Myles Garrett for taking a big bag of money, because remember, football players, much like MMA, they have a small window to make a lot of money, right? Like, they're not, right. Football players have a very small window where they're actually in their prime of their careers. I'm not faulting Francis, by the way. I'm saying good for you going over and making a ginormous amount of money to fight Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua and $12 million to fight a guy that you should be a 12-1 favorite to beat in Renan Ferreira. Good for you. I'm not faulting him at all. But you're right. Like, you can't now say this guy's documented, this guy won't fight me. Again, not faulting you for taking the money. You should. Fighters, listen, this is a business. And as much as, like, we hear all the time guys say, I want to be a champion, I want to be the best in the world, I understand that. But remember, your window to make money, as Dana says, this is an opportunity. You better take it when you can grab it. So I don't fault Francis for doing it, but
if Francis didn't have the boxing thing, Damon,
he's not going to elevate himself to where he can be the greatest heavyweight in the sport anymore. He just can't.
if Francis didn't have the boxing option, it would have been the stupidest decision ever made, right? But he had the boxing option, and he knew that fighting one fight in boxing was going to make him so much money that it would override anything else. And so that made a lot of sense, right? But, with no boxing option, there was no question. Let's move on and get there's some good questions up here. I want to get some of your thoughts on them. This is the question, I guess, not the greatest question, not my favorite question, but we get it all the time. So let's get it out of the way up at the start. What do you think? I have said no. I don't think we see Conor McGregor fight. What do you think?
I don't think we see Conor McGregor ever fight again. I think we've seen him fight for the final time already. I think, and I like Conor. I've always had a good relationship with Conor. I just think I do a podcast with Matt Brown, and Matt Brown says Conor has grown up in the spotlight, and he can't quite let go of that spotlight. And so I think he's just like clinging on to those last, like he's hanging on the rope by the helicopter right now, and he doesn't want to let go.
I said this, Damon, a number of times, so I'll repeat it, for your benefit. A lot of the people I see on here are regulars, and they have heard me say this before. I think Conor wants to fight, but what I don't think Conor wants to do is train. And Conor wants to go out and party and do all these things. So if he could get a fight where, like somebody said to him, hey, Conor, I was just in the bar last night drinking. I'll fight you on Saturday. I think Conor would take that, right? That's what Conor wants to do. But going through the rigors of a 6-8 week training camp or more, I don't think he wants to do that. And so I agree with you, and let's not waste any more time on him. But I think Conor is done. We agree on that. Is Islam versus Brady becoming one of the most anticipated fights for early 2026? If JDM wins, can we see Islam JDM for Abu Dhabi card? Let me start with that. I'll start with the first part, Islam versus Brady. Most anticipated fight. Damon, this is just me, but I think Islam is just a cut or more above Sean Brady. And I give Brady, if you saw my column, Rakit, I praised Brady like crazy for his performance against Leon Edwards. But I think, there's a massive gulf between Leon Edwards and Islam Makhachev. Makhachev is so much better than Leon Edwards and pretty much everybody else that I don't think that we can sit there off of that one performance. If Brady did that to Bilal Muhammad in a rematch, okay, then that's a different story. But Damon, I'm going to get your take, but I just don't see Islam versus Brady being hey, good fight, interesting fight. I won't argue, but the most anticipated fight for 2026, I don't think so. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it was a good win, very good win. And I think we've kind of seen like the passing of the guard, so to speak, the end of kind of like Leon Edwards being an elite welterweight. There's nothing wrong with that. Everyone has their day. I like Sean Brady. I think he's a monster, but again, it's not like we're 10 years removed. He got absolutely battered and knocked out by Bilal Muhammad on the feet. And Bilal Muhammad's an incredible wrestler in his own right. Everyone just loves to discount Bilal, and I don't understand it. I think again, could he lose to Jack Della Maddalena? Sure. I don't think he will. If you're asking me to pick that fight, I think Bilal wins. And we already know Bilal and Islam aren't going to fight. So, no, I don't think and again, I think Brady's got to beat, I said I'd like to see him fight Shavkat next. I know a lot of people disagree because they want Shavkat to fight for the title. But again, timing is things. And the title fight's not till May. I don't know how long Shavkat wants to sit out. I think Brady and Shavkat would be a really interesting fight. Or is Usman coming back? When is he coming back? There's other matchups. I don't think Brady's quite there yet.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let's throw this one on. What about Cain and the situation there? I wrote a column on that the other day, Damon. I don't know if you happen to see it, but I basically said I understand why Cain did what he did. I sympathize with Cain for doing what he did, but I think Cain Well, I'm back now. I'm not sure what's going on here, guys. I really apologize. I have 2 gigabit internet in this house, Damon. I got arrows all over the place, and apparently that's me. I'm not sure what is going on here, but in any event, so just to finish up on answering this question, I just think what Cain said in court was apt, right? Because if you go around, number one, we don't know that the Goulart, who was accused of abusing Cain's son, we don't know he's guilty yet, right? And you just can't go out there and decide you're the jury and he's guilty and that I'm gonna do it. I sympathize with Cain's feelings. I would have the same rage and the same emotion that Cain felt, but I think that in a civilized society you can't do that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's a horrible situation, and I don't have kids, so I can't even speak to the depth of the anger and rage that Cain would have felt. I can say from my own personal perspective, I probably would feel the same way. And, the way it happened was the guy who was accused of molesting his son got out on bail against the advice of the prosecution. And from my understanding, I guess they didn't notify the family as they were supposed to. And he found out secondhand, and he went again. I'm not saying he should have done it, but I understand the rage and the instinct.
Oh, of course.
And I think, if you hear the comments from the judge, he basically said, listen, this whole thing is tragic. There's 2 victims in this case, of course. There's a victim, of course, who got shot, and then Cain, dealing with his son and everything. So,
listen, 3 victims because Cain's son is a victim.
Yeah, exactly.
Cain is a victim, and the guy who got shot is a victim.
Absolutely. So listen, I think Cain's going to end up probably spending a year or even less in prison. I'm not saying that's a good thing. Hopefully, this all, I think this was the best case scenario considering where it could have gone. I mean, they were looking for 30 years to life. He got, after time served and everything, he's going to do a year and maybe less based on good behavior. So,
and I hope Trump pardons him. I think that is a possibility. Given,
well, he can't. Trump can't pardon him because
that's a state.
Yeah,
that's my.
Yeah, it has to. It had to be Gavin Newsom. I don't know if Gavin Newsom will do it, but I think when it's all said and done, I think Cain's going to spend a far less. Like, they gave the 5-year sentence sounds harsh, but when you put in all the time and everything, it's probably going to be less than a year and maybe less depending on how it plays out.
I am with you on that one. So let's move on. Henry Cejudo, final fight. I wrote after his last fight, I was not impressed with his performance against Song Yadong, and I'm not sure where Henry was saying the fight's just starting and I was getting into it. I didn't see Henry doing anything, and the explosion and the quickness that marked Henry at one point in his life and his fighting career, to me, was gone. I know he wants that rematch with Song. Dana did not seem all that interested in it. Are you interested in that?
I'm not really. I do think there should have been a point deduction. I do think it probably should have been a draw as opposed to a win, because I thought the point deduction should have happened. But I don't know that Henry was. Henry's statement kind of sounded a little Colby-esque, where Colby's like, I was just getting warmed up against Joaquin Buckley. No, you were getting hammered for 3 rounds, and the fight got stopped by a cut. Yeah, I mean, listen, I saw Henry told President Trump over the weekend, like, he's come back for one more. You give him the one more, you got to give the guy the chance to go out on his own shield, so to speak. But I don't really have a whole lot of interest in that Song Yadong rematch. I don't know that I have the perfect fight for Henry, but you give him one more. He's done enough to where you give him that one more chance to go out on his own.
Yeah, I mean, they have let so many other fighters go out with one more, so I think they do it. I just think it would be smart for Henry to walk away from it, because he is one of the greats. And I don't take the end of the career. There's a lot of guys that do this, BJ Penn and, a bunch of them there, Dan Hardy, their end of their careers are not the same as, in boxing. There's a ton of guys. Evander Holyfield had that. Larry Holmes had that. Right. And I just look at it and I say, well, if you go out, I consider you in your prime when I vote for you for Hall of Fame, or when I think of you for all-time status. But I think in Henry's case, it's a little different. He came back and he didn't look good against Aljo, against Merab. He was kind of, blah, blah, blah. And then he, doesn't look great against Song. Like, what can we expect from him at this point?
Yeah, it's a tough road, and again, to his credit, he's fought good competition. And Merab's best in the world. Aljo is a former champion. No shame in losing those fights.
No.
But yeah, listen, age and time catches up. And I think the biggest what if with Henry is, what if he didn't retire?
That was the mistake he made. Yes,
that's the mistake, because he was in the prime of his career at that moment, as big as he could have gotten, and it's just like, man, you think of what could have been, because he was on top of the world, being flyweight champ, bantamweight champ, and then walked away for 3 years, and you wonder what if.
Here is an interesting one. UFC is going to Azerbaijan, and whenever anybody ever questioned Dana White and saying, "Are you going everywhere?" And that, you've been to enough Dana White press conferences. It used to be back in the day. Damon's old enough you can see the gray hair coming up out of Damon. My hair is already gone, right? But we used to go to these press conferences, and every press conference there would be 6 or 10 guys that were there that weren't regulars on the circuit, and they would say, "Hey, is the UFC going to come to X city?" And there would be, first it was Kansas City, then it was, are you coming to Houston, or whatever city it happened to be, right? We would hear those questions at the post-fight press conference, and now they've been around so much. So, so Dana says they're going everywhere. I believe they're going everywhere. They're going to Azerbaijan. I don't know how big that card is going to be, but of course, Fiziev has to be in the main event on that card, you would think.
100%. And I know he's talked about going to featherweight. I don't know that I love that for him. I mean, I've always had a problem with, guys jumping down in weight thinking that's going to be the solution. It's not like he got, he took a fight on whatever it was, 2 weeks notice.
11 days notice. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he fought great.
Yeah. Listen, if he wants to do it, it's his own career, but I've never really thought that's the solution. Having a bad day at the office and be like, let me drop even more weight and go down to another division. Dan Hooker tried that very briefly and it did not work out for him. And he went back to 155 and said, yeah, I should be here. You know what? Why not? I know maybe I'm just throwing this out there. Why not Fiziev and Dan Hooker if he's ready? Like, why not that? Or do the rematch with Gamrot? They didn't really have a fight. It started right. And he got injured right away. Fiziev's going to draw no matter what if he's fighting at home. I just don't love the featherweight move for him.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. Here, Rakit asked another question about Ankalaev, and that was the talk the other day about the rematch potentially with Alex Pereira in August. I think Alex Pereira deserves a rematch given what the top of the division is, right? The UFC used to not be so much rematch friendly, and more recently they have been, leaning into rematches. And I think in this case, they owe Alex Pereira that, right? Alex Pereira has done everything they have asked him to do over the last 2 years. Conor McGregor pulled out of UFC 303 with a broken toe. Alex Pereira saves the show with 2 broken toes, and he fights, right? So I think that they owe him that, because it was a close fight. However you saw it, what did you score the Pereira Ankalaev fight?
48-47 Ankalaev. I did have Ankalaev winning that one.
Yeah, I had a 48-47 Pereira, and I gave the third round to Pereira, and that was the decisive round to me. I had round 1, 3, and 5 for Pereira, rounds 2 and 4 for Ankalaev. But I said at the immediate end of the fight, round 3 could have gone either way, right? So it was one of those ones where you just kind of flip a coin. I thought Alex landed the harder shots in the third round, and that's what I went. But I had no problem with Ankalaev winning, but I think they do deserve a rematch. Have you heard anything about where UFC 319 might be?
I have not heard anything yet, because I know obviously we're talking early June is Jersey, late June, of course, is going to be International Fight Week, July. I've not really heard a lot. They've been doing Utah a lot this year. I don't know if Utah's going to get back in
Chicago. I think is might be July is what I'm hearing. Yeah, July.
Chicago, but I haven't, and I know they've been doing the travel. Obviously, they went to Australia last September, so I think August, September, you're probably looking at an international card there. Would they go back to Brazil for a pay-per-view? I don't know. I don't know if Ankalaev would really want to sign up to go fight Alex in Brazil, but I think that I haven't heard location, but I think August would make a lot of sense and gives Alex the time he needs to heal up. And yeah, I'm with you. They need to do the rematch. And let's be honest. I mean, I love Yuri Prochazka, but is anyone really going to cry that he doesn't get a title shot right now after already getting a couple of them and losing to Alex? So yeah, Alex is the fight. I just haven't heard exactly the timing. So
I don't think I saw you at UFC 311, but Dana said at that fight, he would consider Prochazka against the winner of Ankalaev, which I don't understand. But he said he would consider it. But I think given the way the fight went, that I don't think there's any way you can go any way other than Pereira. That's my guess.
Yeah. Pereira is a star, and again, the third round, exactly what you said. That's exactly the round. I had the third round for Pereira or for Ankalaev, and that's the difference in the fight. You do the rematch. I mean, if Carlos Ulberg went out there and absolutely starched Jan Blachowicz, maybe you say there's a young guy, but that was not the kind of fight. And as much as I love Yuri, again, he's had a couple of shots against Alex, and the second one went worse than the first one. I think you got maybe Ulberg fights Yuri and then the winner of that, but Yeah, you got to give it to Alex. Yeah, it's got to be Alex.
There was a question about the UFC TKO boxing. I'm going to pass on that unless you have any thoughts, because I said I didn't want to have too much about boxing. Do you have any thoughts on that, or should we go to the next question?
We can talk TKO boxing. I've been following this one pretty close.
All right, so any thoughts that you have on that?
I mean, listen, I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, just like anything else. I mean, I think people have a little bit unrealistic expectations of what it's going to be. I think it's going to end up being more of a kind of lower level, mid-level guys, and then building them up into stars. You look at, the investment that Dana has made and some of the younger guys, Callum Walsh, he's huge on Callum Walsh. I think that's what we're going to see this league. I don't think you're going to see Terrence Crawford and Canelo signing up to fight for TKO boxing. I think.
Well, they are going to fight for that. That is going to be the first fight of TKO boxing. Well, Canelo versus Callum Walsh. That it will be the first.
Yeah, but like they're going to build it up, and build it up slowly. And listen, when you got a guy like Turki Al-Sheikh who's got all the money in the world, and we'll see how it goes. But I think I love Dana on the first day when Turkey's like, we're going to debut in September. He's like, slow down, slow down.
Yeah, no, Dana was like freaking out as Turkey was talking, and I think he had to come out of his pants to stop that. But I'll talk more about that on a boxing live that we do. We talked about Brady a second ago, but let's just say this: Della Maddalena versus Bilal. We don't know Shavkat's health yet, so let's say for the sake of argument, Shavkat is not healthy enough to go when Bilal or the winner of JDM and Bilal is ready to go. Do you think Brady has done enough to get that title shot?
It depends. I think it depends on who's champion. If it's Bilal, I would say probably not quite yet. I know that sounds maybe a little unfair because he did just go out and beat Leon Edwards as dominantly as he did. But again, it's not like it's been so long he got knocked out by Bilal. So I think if Bilal's champion, maybe Brady wins one more. He fights Usman. He fights Joaquin Buckley. He fights Shavkat, depending on who's healthy. And if it's JDM, maybe you have to fight with Islam going up to 170 and fighting for the title, which I think he would get it right away. But otherwise, I think JD and Brady probably makes more sense. But Bilal, I think, is the X factor. If he's still champion, I think it's a little harder to give Brady the title shot right now because he did get knocked out by Bilal, just a couple years ago.
We are back. I'm not sure what is going on here because I have such a good internet connection, Damon, and this has not happened to me. And now I think it's got to be your fault because we bring you on, and so it's just driving me crazy. But I apologize. Go ahead, finish up what you were saying.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think it all depends on who's champion. If Bilal's champion, then you probably got to have Brady fight someone else. If JDM wins, then I think you have a better argument for Brady at that point.
Right. Let's move on there. All right, this is a good one. This is about the fight on Saturday, Moreno versus Erceg. Erceg being fed to the wolves. I like Moreno in the fight, but are we throwing Erceg to the wolves? I'm not so sure about that. What do you think, Damon?
Yeah, I mean, it's not favorable for him going into Mexico, and I think Moreno's going to win. Obviously got knocked out pretty hard by Kai Kara France not that long ago. So I don't know if feeding him to the wolves is the right narrative, but I don't give him a great chance to win. But then, I didn't think he was going to go out there and give the performance he did against Pantoja, and he looked pretty good. He lost, but he looked pretty good. So I don't know if feeding to the wolves. I don't like the fight for him, though.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I thought that Pantoja won that fight, but you could make an argument. There were fights like you can make an argument that Erceg won the fight. He was at least in it enough that you say, hey, he won it. And I think, he's near the top of the rankings. And when they're trying to put fights together, I don't know that there's a lot of people that are crazy about fighting in Mexico City, right? And we mentioned Cain before. And I was there in Mexico City when Cain fought Fabricio Verdum. And who would have ever thought we would have seen Cardio Cain, of all people, gassing out? And that's why he lost his heavyweight championship, because he gassed out in Mexico City. So I think there's not a lot of guys that are like crazy about going down to Mexico City and fighting. And on top of that, then fighting a Mexican or a Mexican American, on top of that makes it even worse. So, I think that's probably why Erceg got the fight, but, he was willing to take it where a lot of other people weren't. But I don't have a problem with, with them doing that. So here's one I think is interesting. BF says Aldo Cejudo would be fun. What do you think? That might be one.
Yeah, it's the Aldo booking since he's come back has been really odd. I know he's fighting Amin Zahabi, and I'm just like, why? Like, I like Amin Zahabi. I'm not knocking Amin Zahabi, but I'm like, what? And then like Mario Batista, same thing. So yeah, I'm with Aldo Cejudo. That is a good suggestion. I think Aldo's still incredible, but yeah, he's had some really odd matchmaking since he's come back.
Yeah, I can't figure that one out. That was a little bit. So let's see. Here's another Erceg question. Erceg seems to have Dana White privilege. When I see guys like Joshua Van having more than 6 wins and still fighting guys outside the top 10 is an insult. I don't know that it's an insult. I thought that the fight the other day against Taisho, who was it? The Japanese guy that he fought. I'm drawing a blank on his name.
Now you got me drawing a blank too, but yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
So, I thought that was like a, kind of a step up fight for him, and he passed it, right? He looked good in the fight, and I thought, hey, that his level of opposition went up. Now I think we got to see him against some better competition. I think Joshua Van is a guy, I picked him in that fight, and I think Van is a guy that could become a contender, second half of 25 and into 26. I think he's a guy that we will see.
And I think also when they say, like, I understand the instinct of Dana White privilege, I don't know if it's a lot of privilege to get thrown to Mexico City to fight Brandon Moreno. I think Erceg has name value because he's a former title contender, and he's had a pay-per-view. He co-headlined with Pantoja. I think that played a factor, and I don't know that they're really doing him a big favor by putting him in that situation down there, if I'm being honest.
Now, you're 100% right, but here's what they're going to tell him. Hey, look what we did for you. You were ranked number 9, I think it was, or number 10 when he got the title shot. He gets a title shot coming out of there. He puts up a good performance. So now they're saying, hey, we're giving you a main event. We're putting you in against a former champion. So it's like, he's like, oh yeah, like, thanks a lot for what you did for us.
Yeah, and I like Joshua Van. I think he's got star potential, young guy, nasty power, really, really good potential. But again, I understand the instinct to say he should be fighting the higher competition, and you're not necessarily wrong, but there's also an instinct of saying you don't need to rush him. You don't need to just throw him to the wolves. I think I'm a huge Manel Kopp guy. I don't need to see him fight Manel Kopp at this point. I don't think that's at this point, a year and a half from now, maybe then.
So it's a boxing one, but I had recommended. I did a live stream the other day, Damon, talking about George Foreman's passing, and I mentioned that the Ron Lau. Have you ever seen the George Foreman Ron Lau fight?
I have not seen that fight, actually. I am a big George Foreman guy. I love George Foreman. I was a big George Foreman guy.
Well, Damon, I'm going to tell you what I said on that live stream. Because the George Foreman Ron Lau fight might be the greatest fight you never saw. That is Hagler Hearns going into the 6th round. 2 heavyweights. It was just insane. And the entire ABC broadcast with Howard Cosell is available on YouTube. I linked it in my story. But what an incredible fight. And if you get a chance to see that, if you just knock guys, the first round was a good round, but when you look at the first round, in the context of the entire fight, you go, oh my God, that round was terrible, but it was a great round, and the rest of the fight was insane. Excuse me. Let's move on here. I have an answer to this one, but I'm going to throw this at your way first and see what you think. Who, in your opinion, will be the guy losing his own next?
Well, that's a good question. Who am I thinking of being undefeated right now? I mean, let's see who else undefeated right now. I'm not thinking about Shavkat. Shavkat. I mean, that's probably the name at the top of the list, just because I thought I like Shavkat. I'm not knocking Shavkat, but I think the fight against Ian Gary kind of knocked a little luster off him a little bit, and I think I was going to pick Bilal Muhammad to win that fight. I'll still pick Bilal Muhammad if it happens. So I'll go with that. If they're gonna save Shavkat, stick him on the shelf until after UFC 3, whatever number that is, 315. And have him fight the winner of that, then yeah, I'll still say that, because people love to underrate Bilal Muhammad, man. It's kind of crazy.
I'm trying to pull up my text with Bilal Muhammad because I texted Bilal the night of Shavkat after the fight ended. Shavkat and what's his name? Ian Machado Gary, right?
Ian Gary.
And so I just wrote back and I said, Shavkat is not the boogeyman, regardless of the outcome here. And I said that texted him during the fight. I think it was late in the fourth round that I texted him that. And he said, I wanted to be the one to expose him, but regardless, I get to beat someone who is still undefeated, right? So, that was kind of the thing. But yeah, to me, I think Shavkat is still pretty good, but you see that record and all those early finishes, and you're going, oh my God, we can't, this guy can't be touched. But I think based on what I saw, and I'm not saying because of Canelo boxing Bilal, but I think Bilal's just got the game to beat him.
Yeah, the longer you go with Bilal, the less likely you are to win. And we saw that in the third round with Ian Machado Gary. If it goes third, fourth, fifth round with Bilal, it could be a really hard night on Shavkat Rakhmonov, if I'm being honest.
100%. So let's see. If Pantoja beats Kai Kara France next, he should go up to 135 and challenge the winner of Merab versus O'Malley. I interviewed Corey Sandhagen the other day, Damon, and I mentioned in that interview, I said, boy, there's nobody out there after Merab and O'Malley do the rematch. Where do you go? And I think the winner of Sandhagen and Figueiredo might be the guy most in line if you're talking about somebody who is in the division. What would you think of Pantoja going up? I mean, that it would be a calculated risk for him because he never got that defining fight at 22. I think what my opinion would be is if Moreno comes out with a win over Erceg and then he beats Kara France, I think you do that fight one more time and see what happens.
I also listen. I know the Kara France fight is out there, but I don't know that I'm saying that's the one because I think Manel Kape's got an argument that he may jump in and jump over Kara France. I mean, let's not forget Kai's coming off one win. And not saying it's not a good win, it's a good win, but Manel Kape's looking like a killer, these last couple of fights. And I think Manel Kape Pantoja rematch would be really interesting because they had a really good fight in I think it was Kape's
2020.
Yeah, so I wouldn't just anoint Kara France getting the shot, but as far as Pantoja going up, I don't know. I'm kind of over the whole weight class changing thing. Just be the greatest flyweight. And I know the chances of him getting to 11 title defenses and then topping Demetrius Johnson is pretty much, next to impossible. But why not? Why not just stick around? There's other, Manel Kape and maybe Kara France gets another win. You got guys like Joshua Van coming up. I love Pantoja. I just don't really see a need for him to get. If he wants to, sure. But yeah, I like guys. There's nothing wrong with being the best fighter in the world in your own weight class.
When we talk about guys going up, I think DC is the perfect example. Now, DC, jumped around, right? He was a light heavyweight, went to heavyweight, came back. I think the thing with DC, that made sense is, hey, if he wants to move weight classes, that's one thing, right? He's a big guy, it. So if you when a fighter is having trouble making weight or when he's cleaned out this entire division, then you say, okay, go ahead and give that a shot, right? I mean, Alex Pereira was close. He didn't do everything. Of course, he didn't beat Ankalaev, and you could have said, all right, move on, do your thing at heavyweight. But I think, we haven't seen that from Pantoja, and there's a lot of guys that have tried this whole thing and they haven't done it. Amanda Nunes was great at it because she was big enough to fight at featherweight and she had been dominating at bantamweight, so why not give her that opportunity to go up there and fight Cyborg? But I think those kind of situations are few and far between.
Yeah, I mean, John Jones doing it, I understood. John Jones had cleared out the light heavyweight division 3 times over. He just had nothing left to fight down there. So him going to heavyweight made sense. And let's not forget, Daniel Cormier was a heavyweight. He only went down to light heavyweight because he didn't want to have to run into his buddy Cain Velasquez. So He was never really meant to be at light heavyweight. He did incredible things at light heavyweight, but that was never really his division. And listen, I mean, again, I understand, and I always call it the Conor McGregorization of our sport. When he got to do it, and we saw what happened when he became champ, everyone lost their minds, and now it's the biggest thing. But Kev, you've been around the sport long enough, like I have. We went years circling around Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, and it never happened. And that was the one fight. Now we're talking about and now we're talking about everybody jumping weight classes. Just be the best weight, just be the best fighter in your weight class. And if you're Alex Pereira, You fight at middleweight, you lost the belt, you clearly are cutting too much weight, then you move to light heavyweight. Not because you want to be champ. Just I get so bored with that.
I think that is something that has made a difference in terms of boxing. Like when you look at boxing, if TKO is going to make a difference in boxing, it is going to be making the wins on the way up. Right? Like I wrote a column, and I know it pissed some people when Zuffa off, and it pissed Tom Loeffler off about Callum Walsh, right? And I talked about Callum Walsh's the opponent that he fought, right? So the opponent he fought was 19-1, but then you look in his record, and the first person he fought in his pro debut was 0-37. Then the person he fights in his next fight was, and this is no lie, I could pull the record up and let me do it while I'm talking to you, because I think it's worth hearing. And the point that I'm trying to make is a larger point. Let me see here, get this out of the way where I can type. I'm typing without being able to see. Dean Sutherland. So he fought Dean Sutherland on the night before St. Patrick's Day, right? So I think when you look at fighters, you have to look at not only what their record is, but who they have beaten to get that record, right? So Dean Sutherland goes out there in his pro debut, and he beats a fighter named Victor Edgaha. Victor Edgaha, 0 wins, 37 losses, and 1 draw. Then his next fight is against a fighter named Arvidas Trezino. He was 27, 79, and 3. Then he fights somebody named Kevin McCauley, who was 15, this is no lie, 175 and 12. Then in his fourth fight, he fights somebody who was 5-1, and then he goes 4-43-1. So when Callum Walsh fought that guy, and then on top of that, I didn't even mention that in my story. I mentioned the more recent fights that he had, which were 2 fights before he fought Callum. He had a guy that was 11-142-5, and 2 fights before that, he had somebody who was 6-14-0. So basically, that guy was fighting nobody but stiffs, and so like, if you want to win, you fight him. He looks like he has a good record, but he can't really fight. And if you're a prospect, so I think if Zuffa is going to do anything good for boxing, it's going to be, they're going to make those wins mean something, because they're going to make those matches even. And I think that's the secret sauce to the UFC, right? If you were the number 7 contender in one division, you know, people are dogging on Steve Erceg. Steve Erceg is a good freaking fighter, right? Now, he's not great. He's not a Hall of Famer, but Steve Erceg is also fighting legitimate opponents almost every time out. And I think that that's what their secret sauce is. If you're number 7, you're going to fight number 6, number 8, maybe number 9, maybe number 5. And you win that, they move you up a little bit. You lose that, they move you back a little bit. And I think that's the way matchmaking has to be done.
I mean, Jake Paul's 11-1, and he's yet to fight a boxer. So I mean, you can
we fought Mike Tyson. Come on.
Yeah, you can get to it. You can get to a good record fighting a lot of guys. Doesn't mean you're legitimate. Doesn't mean you're the best in the world. And by the way, I'm joking about Jake. I'm using it as an example, but you can. I mean, that's how boxing works. Sometimes you can get to an inflated record. It does happen.
Yeah, it's crazy. We got a few more questions, so let's throw some of them up here. Who will be the featherweight champion at the end of the year? My guess will be an undefeated champion. What do you think?
Boy, I don't know. I mean, my head leans Diego Lopez in the Volkanovski fight, just because I think, you know, when you get knocked out hard a couple times in a row, it's tough to come back from that. And I like Diego Lopez a lot, but I've been riding the Movsar Evloev train for a while now, and I think if they do that rematch, that may be the undefeated fighter you're talking about. I like Movsar to be champion sometime when he gets the shot. I just don't know if it'll be this year.
Yeah, I like Volkanovski, believe it or not, to win that fight. The concern is, you know, you're coming off knockouts, but he's taken the time, and I think he's done the right thing, right? And like Justin Gaethje did, and I think that when you do that, that's something. And then we have another question about Patchy Mix and Aaron Pico. Last I had talked to Ali Abdelaziz, you know, Pico had talked to the UFC, but he was still under that right to match offer. So I'm assuming that nothing has changed there.
Yeah, I talked to Aaron, whatever it was, a month ago, and he flat out told me, he's like, you know, I think the matching period is a year, and he's like, if it takes me sitting out a year, I'll sit out a year. I'm never fighting for PFL. That's done. So as far as I know, they're still holding the matching rights. So basically, he's just going to have to sit out for a year, which is really unfortunate, especially with Don Davis's whole, if you don't want to be here, we won't have you here. Well, you're not really standing by that. But again, a whole other conversation. Patchy Mix, He's stuck, kind of stuck, and he's still got multiple fights left on his deal. You know, I mean, obviously there's timeline of when he can fight, but yeah, I mean, I've heard July is going to be their next like pay-per-view, their next like mega fight card, whatever you want to call it. So maybe he fights in July. I don't know. I feel bad for him though, because I think Patchy's an incredible fighter, one of the best bantamweights in the world, and he's just kind of.
I think he's one of the best. He would be a great potential matchup for Merab. We're talking about, hey, if O'Malley doesn't beat him, Merab could be the champion for a while, because I don't see anybody on the way up right now that you say, hey, that guy is a threat to Merab.
I mean, Umar was the guy, and he beat Umar. I was like, that was such an incredible performance to beat Umar Nurmagomedov. Umar's a monster, and he beat him. So, yeah, and I know Patchy and Merab trained together pretty frequently out in Vegas. So, I mean, I think that would be a really intriguing fight if they actually did match up. I'd love to see it, but I just don't know when Patchy's going to be able to actually get out of a contract to go fight in the UFC.
So, we talked a little bit about the PFL. Let's put our heads together. Like, if you and I are running the PFL, what do we do to kind of get them to make them the strongest contender against the UFC that they can be? Like, what do you think are the things that are key to get done to make give the PFL the best chance of, hanging around and being a viable option?
Well, I wish I had the easy answer to that. I mean, I think I think the biggest problem the PFL has right now is they're trying to. I know this sounds like a weird thing to say, but like they're trying to sell themselves. They keep saying things like co-leader. You're not the co-leader, man. You're not. You're not even close to being the co-leader. You are a distant number. And actually, I'd argue number 3. I think BKFC is bigger than PFL in terms of like combat sports. Tournaments are great and seasons and all this kind of stuff. I understand you're trying to differentiate yourself, and I appreciate that. What do people want to see? Great fights and great stories.
Right.
That's what they're not giving us. Great stories. You know what I mean? Like, there was a compelling story they had with Kayla Harrison and Chris Cyborg. Never got it done. Give us story. Like it or not, people like drama, people like stories. Give us stories. Give us something, the reason to care, more than just saying he's ranked number 3 by Tapology. That means nothing in the grand scheme of things. Like I said, Conor's not ranked. If Conor actually came back and fought, it would still be a monster fight. He hasn't won a fight in like 5 years.
Right.
That's, people want names, people want star power, people want storylines. And they just have not done a good job at that. You got to do better at that. You got to give us a reason to care. And just telling us they're ranked is not the reason how to get us to care.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when they're telling us they're ranked, what they're trying to say is our fighters are as good as the UFC's fighters. I mean, I think that's what they're trying to say. And I was still working for Yahoo at the time when Don Davis first said that. And so what I did is I went out there and I took the ones, all the major websites, MMA websites, ESPN, MMA Junkie, MMA Fighting, whoever else was there at the time, and I took their divisional rankings, and I went through and I looked and I said, okay, how many fighters are ranked in the top 10 of theirs from the PFL? Bellator was separate at the time, and UFC. And I think like close to 90% of the ranked fighters were UFC fighters, right? And when I look at it today, I say, okay, out of the top 100 fighters in the world, how many are under contract to the UFC? And I would say low end 80, maybe high end 85, right? You're kind of in that, range where there's some fighters that are out there that are, we mentioned Patchy Mix, I think he would be a guy that would do really well. So I think that they have to forget about that, hey, we're UFC light. I think what they should try to do is we're going to try to be the WEC, right? And let's go out there and put on these unbelievable fights, and let's get pride in the organization. Like, think of all those fighters, WEC Never Die and all that, that really kept that WEC banner alive long after the organization died, right? And I think if they go out there and say, we are going to make the most badass fights we can make, and then promote them, and that's what they don't do. And I think that, hey, there's PR and there's marketing, and there are two separate things. They have to go hand in hand, and they just don't really do either, but they certainly don't do PR very well. And I think, if they could do that, Damon, I look at it and I say, okay, maybe they can make an inroad, because MMA is such a growing sport. And I think that they could do something. But if they turn around and they say, hey, we're the UFC, we're the equal of the UFC, people just aren't buying that. people aren't buying the UFL as a competitor to the NFL. If you sell it as fun football and something to do when there's not an NFL game, that's one thing. But when you're trying to say we can beat the NFL at their own game, you can't. And they're not beating the UFC at what the UFC is best at.
Yeah, and you know this from being a journalist as long as you've been, Kev. You know when you're getting pitched by PR, and if the UFC reaches out and said, "Hey, we want you to speak to Islam Makhachev," well, yeah, you don't need to tell me anything. It's Islam Makhachev. I know everything there is to know about the guy. It doesn't take me a lot. You can put him on the phone with me right now, and I'd have a great half-hour interview because I know exactly what to ask him. But they reach out and they say, "We want you. Would you want to talk to this guy?" Okay, why? Why? Like, what is there compelling to tell me about this guy? He's in a tournament. Okay, he's in a tournament. But what is going to make people interested in watching, listening, or reading this interview? And when you're not, like, I get those pitches a lot, and when they have an interesting pitch, I'm like, oh, that is cool. That is kind of a good twist. He had this going on in his family, or he's from here, or whatever the case may be. Give us a story. Give us a reason to care. They had, I mean, look at Cedric Doumbé is a great example of that. He is a massive star in France, and they built a couple now. Their second fight, they put him in there with a wrestler. Why you made that matchup, I'll never know. But, like, why are you not putting him in there and actually building around a guy like that? And when was the last time we heard Cedric Doumbé's name? I haven't heard that in months. I don't know when the last time I heard about him was. Like, why that take advantage of the stars you have? Now, I will say they're doing a good job of Paul Hughes. They're putting him in Belfast. I think that's going to be a good idea, having him fight at home. And that fight with Usman Nurmagomedov was incredible. It was a great fight. Build on
why not do that again?
Yeah, that's what you need to build on. That right there. That was one of the best fights of the year so far. Build on that. That's what you need to focus on. And, you know, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, like I said, and having to wait till July to see maybe Patchy Mix, maybe Francis, like it's just these huge long layoffs. It's not helping. Like I said, we're all guilty of recency bias. Give me something to see now, not 8 months from now.
Right. And I mean, you know, that's the other thing when you compare them to UFC, right? UFC is going out and selling their rights, and they're saying we're putting 45 events a year together, including some, you know, what are going to be insane cards. Everybody knows that. And then we got the Contender Series, and we got the Ultimate Fighter that we're not even, you know, we package all that together, and we are giving you content that, you know, will fill your airways for a long time. So when was the last PFL fight card, right? January, you mentioned. We don't have another one until, you know, in April. That's where they're missing, right? You know, you don't have to do 45 a year, but, you know, pick it up. You got enough fighters. You got enough good fighters to make it. When does Johnny Eblen fight again, right? When, you know, I mean, get these guys out and get them going. And, you know, I also think, you know, if I was going to say one other thing, I think that they need to quit the whole broadcast is like a promotion, you know, PFL promotion, and not like covering the fights. Like, you know, when Dan Hardy was at the Jake Paul press conference that they hosted for Francis and Renan Fajeda, Dan's like, I'm afraid to ask them questions. They're so big. Like, get the fuck out of here. Like, you're afraid to ask them a question. I mean, you know, like, just be real with us and present like, hey, you know, how can Renan Fajeda win this fight? Make a case for how he can win the fight, and don't be just such over the top fanboys, right? That's what bothers me. And I think if they could make their best fights, sign some, you know, hey, go in there and hurt the UFC. You're not hurting the UFC by signing Francis so much, but you know what? If you sign a young Sean O'Malley, like let's say they had signed Sean O'Malley, those are the kind of guys to sign. And I'm going to go off this rant in 1 second, but I'm going to tell you a column I wrote when I was at Yahoo. Do you remember when Bellator signed Benson Henderson? At the time, there was free agency for two fighters. It was Aljo and it was Benson Henderson. And everybody was talking, where's Benson Henderson going to go? And when he went to Bellator, there was this huge, Bellator got a score. And I wrote a column and I said, they made a mistake. They should have signed Aljo. Now, it turns out Aljo didn't turn into the big star that we thought he could be, right? You know, he was a champion, but he didn't become the draw or the big, you know, the big guy we thought. But at the time, he was a young fighter on the rise. He had potential. And you're sitting there and you're going, why would you sign a guy who was on the downhill slide? He lost the UFC title. He's not going to get better. You know, maybe he'll tread water for a while and then he's going to go down. Sign the guy on the way up. Sign the guy that you know is going to blossom soon. You can say, hey, look what we have. And I think that that's just been a mistake that they have made repeatedly. First when it was Bellator, now since they're PFL.
Yeah, and I think, listen, it's not for everybody, and I understand it's not for everybody, but one of the reasons why I think BKFC has found so much success is they've grabbed onto a couple of big stars, guys like Mike Perry, who was built for bare knuckle, and Jeremy Stevens. I know Jeremy Stevens has come back to the UFC for a fight, but guys like that, guys who are built for that kind of sport, and they're giving you something different. When you watch BKFC, you're not just watching a not UFC MMA promotion. You're watching something different. It's exciting. It's brutal. And one thing I love about BKFC is they sell tickets. They actually sell tickets. No one else does. Like, unless you go
and they got Oscar Willis fighting for them.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Like, they give you a show. You know what I mean? And like, they embrace it. They embrace the show. They embrace and they put on a great production. Like you said, you had Aaron Pico. You had Aaron Pico under contract, and when Aaron left, like, Aaron still had a fight left on his deal, but his time ran out. Why is he sitting out for a year? Why are you sitting on one of the most talented prospects in the sport? And I understand we've heard these stories about Bellator inflated some of the contracts and some guys are getting paid, whatever the case may be, but you still have talent. I mentioned Cedric Doumbé. Again, where's he been at? Where's Cedric Doumbé at? That's a guy you absolutely should have built around. Where's he at?
Well, let's get out of here with just a couple more questions. Simple one here. I'll let you answer this one. Does Khamzat become champion this year?
No. He loses. Okay. He loses to Dricus du Plessis, so he does not become champion.
Okay. Do you think UFC stays with ESPN or moves on?
Moves on. I am predicting Netflix is the big winner, and I think if they split the package, I think there's a chance someone like maybe Warner Brothers or somebody else gets some of the fight night cards. But I've been long on the train saying Netflix is going to get the big bulk of the UFC, and do they get the pay-per-views and maybe we don't have pay-per-views anymore? I think there's enough money out there to say it could happen.
I am in favor of, well, not in favor, but I have predicted Netflix for a long time as well. So for as long as I can remember, and look what Netflix did in that Mike Tyson, Jake Paul fight, right? And it's not Jake Paul, Mike Tyson fight. It's Mike Paul, Mike Tyson, Jake Paul, right? But that, that was 65 million households, which is roughly equivalent to around 100 million people, plus or minus, 10 million, right? So you're talking, 100 million people saw that fight on Netflix worldwide. And I think, the fact that the NFL went there says what they believe, Netflix can do. Dana White has long, I remember, I think this was even before you were covering MMA. And so you were talking at the beginning of this long thing that, you've been doing this like over 20 years. But I remember Dana White saying back in the day, sitting there talking to him and him saying, I just wish we had one global where we could put all the fights and everybody knew wherever you are in the world, the fight is on this channel and that's going to be it. And now with Amazon, with Netflix, and I think Apple and Google, do not underestimate them in this. I think they might get a part of this, right? Apple with that Apple TV Plus, they tried hard to get the NFL package. They have they're streaming the Major League Soccer, which I know isn't very big, but, they're trying to get into sports and see how that works. I would not be shocked at all if Apple tries to get some UFC fight nights in there, kind of like they stuck their toe in the water at Major League Baseball. But I would not rule out ESPN because I think that, you lose a lot if you're not on that crawl saying, hey, Moreno versus Erceg Saturday night, even if you're not, not on there on the pay-per-views, I think that you need to have that coverage. And I think if they leave ESPN will no longer cover MMA or cover it very little. They might cover the major fights, but they're not going to cover the fight nights and whatnot. And I think the UFC still needs that, in my opinion.
I think it's good to a certain extent, but I also think like we are now in a different era where like as big as ESPN is and how much they once mattered, I don't think it matters as much as it used to. And you also mentioned like I think Amazon Prime is another to watch. Remember before the UFC signed with ESPN, they were close to a deal with Amazon Prime, and I think the difference was we want to be on ESPN, not necessarily we didn't like what Amazon was offering. It's we want to be on ESPN, but I think the sport has grown big enough that it can survive without an ESPN. I think ESPN probably needs the UFC more than the UFC needs ESPN at this point. And I think one big telling factor about Netflix is Ted Sarandos, the co-CEO, said one of the reasons they haven't invested more in sports is because the season format. When you just buy Netflix to watch the NBA or just to watch the NFL, come February, you stop buying Netflix for 6 months or 4 months. Churn. They don't want to lose that. Guess what? UFC's year round. There's never barely a week goes by without a UFC event. UFC, that's why they went to WWE. WWE never takes a week off. They're never off. They're always on. UFC is a perfect fit, and 300 million subscribers worldwide. No one is even remotely close to that in terms of streaming. So yeah, I think Netflix is leading the pack right now.
And think what it was, by the way. I looked when I was writing a story before the Tyson Paul fight. It was 283 million. Now they're surpassed 300 million. So that Tyson Paul fight had such a huge impact on them. And I'm sure the NFL brought them a lot of people. So Damon, I think, that Netflix is a huge player here. And I think it would be an upset at this point if they didn't get there. So anyways, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate everybody's indulgence for these internet problems we had. I'm not sure what the hell was going on with that, but Damon, great stuff. Give people, if anybody wants to follow you, where they can, your social media, where they can find you at, where you're writing, all that type of thing.
Yeah, so obviously I'm over to MMAfighting.com. That's my main place. You can find my writing over there. And, of course, I also host a podcast every Tuesday with UFC fighter Matt Brown called The Fighter versus the Writer. New episodes drop every week. We actually didn't have an episode this week. Matt was in Ireland and France and Spain doing seminars, so he'll be back next week. And then if you want to follow me on social media, Instagram and Twitter especially, I'm at Damon Martin on both places, so you can just find me by my name and follow along over there. And, Kev, thanks for having me, man. This is a blast.
Appreciate it. We will have to do it again. Good stuff, Damon. Keep up the great work, and appreciate you. Everybody, thanks for joining. Enjoy the fights on the weekend, and we will talk to y'all soon.